So yesterday we focused on confinement sites under threat and the Red Hill water crisis in Oahu. Today, we will take a close look at solidarity and allyship within the Japanese American community and across other communities. We have three panelists here to tell us about their transformative work, leveraging this communal history for restorative justice and their calls to action. Then we'll have some time afterwards for Q&A amongst them, and then also with you, the audience. So please, if you have a question, even during the session, please put it in the chat, and Monica or Caroline will pick that up for you. Our first guest is Becca Asaki, a Yonsei mixed heritage descendant of survivors incarcerated at Tule Lake, Heart Mountain, Jerome, and Rower WRA camps, as well as Department of Justice camp at Fort Missoula, Montana. Becca served as co-chair of the Tsuru for Solidarity Family and Children Detention Direct Action Arts Action Committee, and recently has joined the national staff. Congratulations, Becca. She resides in Brooklyn, New York, and serves on the steering committee for the New York Day of Remembrance. They just had theirs last weekend, and I was so honored to work with her recently in Washington, D.C. She's a phenomenal person. So she's going to talk to you today about Tsuru for Solidarity. Thank you, Becca.
So as Julie mentioned, my name is Becca Asaki, and I'm a Yonsei descendant of incarcerees from all across the country: Fresno, Pinedale, Tule Lake, Heart Mountain, Jerome, Rower, Fort Missoula. And I have been told by some of my families that I'm missing some from this list. So it is an ongoing bio. And I'm right now a community organizer with Tsuru for Solidarity. Can go to the next slide. And so as we gather here today to remember and honor the stories of repression and removal that so many of us and our families experienced, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on today, what we're seeing today with immigrant detention. And it's actually quite chilling to reflect on the similarities to what we're seeing today, to what our families experienced. So as many of you might know, Tsuru for Solidarity was founded from the collective outrage of Japanese Americans at the separation of children and our horror at the ongoing detention of migrant children and families by the federal government. And in this slide, you can just see, even in the visuals of our own community's experience and what's happening today, there's such very clear connections. You can go to the next slide. So our community has a history of experiencing human rights violations that we hear echoed in stories from migrants today. So things from indefinite detention, poor food and sanitation, surveillance, substandard healthcare, to really name a few. However, the legal and policy failures, the intergenerational trauma, and economic engines are also strikingly similar. So military necessity and, quote, threats to national security have been replaced by securing the southern border and so-called emergency response to a surge of migrants. And in both instances, these policies are driven by racist agendas and rhetoric and have a deep and long-lasting impact on communities of color. So as our community experienced 80 years ago, migrants today are being stripped of their legal rights and are at the whim of those interpreting policies that fail to center the humanity of those targeted by them. A new generation of families are being traumatized, and we know this trauma will last generations, as it has in our community. And the economic engines that fueled forced removal of our community off our lands and out of our communities are echoed in the profit drivers that are created and are sustaining the largest prison system and the largest immigrant prison system in the world. You can go to the next slide. And in fact, a number of Japanese American World War II mass incarceration sites, including Pomona Fairplex in California and Fort Bliss in Texas, were both proposed and repurposed to detain children. Other former sites of Japanese American mass incarceration were considered as migrant detention sites, including Jerome and Rower in Arkansas. Fort Sill, Oklahoma was proposed and contracted as a site to detain 1,600 migrant children, but the plans were ultimately abandoned after protests by Tsuru for Solidarity elders, survivors of the camps, who led a multi-community coalition of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and API communities, along with members of the Sunrise Movement, Bend the Arc, and Vietnam veterans, to call for its closure. We subsequently co-founded 2 national coalitions to oppose child and family detention in 2021, and are leading direct actions, digital public education campaigns, and advocacy efforts at the state and national levels. We've also been involved in the Northwest Detention Center, where more than 600 Japanese Americans turned out for the Day of Remembrance in 2020 and have come back every year. So we are involved in organizing and direct actions. We were involved in these direct actions at Yuba County Jail and Berks County Residential Center in Pennsylvania that were actually closed in just the past few months. So that's a pretty huge victory. You can go to the next slide. So grounded in the legacy of Japanese American mass incarceration and separation of families in US concentration camps during World War II, we understood that there are immediate and long-term impacts of mass incarceration, and healing has actually been a part of our work since the beginning, particularly at our first actions that were at sites on or close to former incarceration sites for our own community. So for example, in Dilley, Texas, that's like 40 miles down the same road as Crystal City. And then at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where, as I was saying before, that also was an incarceration site for a few hundred Issei. And so those actions were actually standing on the same grounds that held Japanese Americans. And the first healing circles that Dr. Satsuki Ina, one of the founders of Tsuru for Solidarity, led was in Laredo, Texas, back in 2019, after our action at the Dilley Family Detention Center. And it was held with Japanese Americans, DACA recipient immigrant rights organizers, and also refugees who had just been released from Dilley and Carnes family detention centers. And that's after months of harrowing travel through Central America. And as each person shared powerful stories of a shared and yet distinct history of detention by the US government, we also shared our struggles to retain our dignity, our sense of community, and our sense of self. And towards the end, one of the Japanese American survivors shared with the group that he wanted to let those targeted now to know that we came not only to fight to end the detention that they experienced, but to offer a perspective that in community, there is hope on the other side, right? That in solidarity, it is possible to rebuild a life after incarceration and to even experience joy. And he held our experiences up as proof that their lives didn't need to be defined by the worst thing that had ever happened to them. And in that moment, as we all were crying and holding each other, I knew that this was actually was very different from other actions, and that this form of solidarity and direct action was very different. It wasn't just about expressing our rage at an oppressive system, but it was also about taking back the power that was stripped from us through the process of forced removal, incarceration, and resettlement. So it is not easy for us to confront military police as we did at Fort Sill, and being with other communities actually helped us be clear about why we were there. It was about ending isolation and suffering. It was about celebrating our resilience and resistance and holding each other when resistance was unsuccessful, right? It was about truly seeing each other as fully human and actually being able to see our liberation as tied to one another. Can go to the next slide. And that was really important, I think, not only for our community, but also the other communities that we were organizing with, to really see that we were not alone in the struggle, that this is not new what's happening, or is not specific to our communities. And that gave us a deeper analysis and connected us, even though we are often separated and pitted against one another. And as part of Tsuru fighting to end immigrant detention, myself, I'm always holding my own family in my mind, right? So my grandmother was 14 when she was first separated from her family on the day of Pearl Harbor, and then incarcerated in Pinedale, then Tule Lake, and then finally Heart Mountain. My grandfather was 19 when he was incarcerated, and his youngest brother was 4. And they were incarcerated first at Fresno, then Jerome, and then Rower. And so when I'm outside a detention center or hearing stories from currently impacted people, I'm always mourning my grandma and my grandpa's incarceration and the impacts that it has had on me and my family. And because of this, I'm nearly always working through hard emotions. But I am there to honor their legacy and to make new sense of their experience by being the ally that they needed then. But I also try not to lose sight of those who are currently inside, right? It is not my grandma or my great uncle or my grandpa, but it is someone's family. And it is someone who matters enough to fight like I would fight for my own family to be released from this system that is incarcerating them, and to dismantle this system. And I'm trying to remember that and bring the whole of myself to whatever we are doing. You can go to the next slide. So it is as a part of this work that we get a chance to heal from our own trauma, right? When we take back our voice of resistance that was nearly extinguished by the government, when we show up for others in a way that our community needed, and when we embrace ourselves, when we lean in and hold space for listening and holding one another, and when we move into action to stop violence towards other communities that have been similarly impacted, it is then we can begin to trust ourselves and trust each other. We can begin to reclaim our culture that was stripped from us. We can confront authority and risk harm. We can make mistakes. We can try something and fail. Can try to build and stay in relationships with other communities, to stay committed to a fight, even when it feels like we aren't winning. And all of this is necessary for us to find a true solution to these big problems. And in this process, we are finally no longer exiled or forcibly removed and struggling internally with mass incarceration. That's actually where we get closer to liberation. And so that's kind of what we mean when we talk about Tsuru, when we talk about solidarity. We talk about it in terms of for us and for others as well. You can go to the last slide. And so I just wanted to kind of welcome you all to join in this healing and solidarity and action. You're all more than welcome. And we all were new to this work when we started, and we've been building it together. And we really invite anyone from our community to join. So I think that I'm going to get some help dropping some links in the chat. But you can sign up for an orientation and learn about all of our ongoing campaigns. So I mentioned a little bit about our child and family detention committee that's working to close detention sites for children and families. We also have a committee working on reparations, which I think another panelist will talk more deeply about that work, that we work closely with them. And we also have a committee working on police, prisons, and ending adult detention. So you're more than welcome to join any of those working groups and campaigns, and our healing justice work is really integrated throughout. We also have a newsletter that you're welcome to sign up for, and it also includes another newsletter called GISO, which is developed and produced by our Child and Family Detention Committee as a way for us to learn more about child and family detention within our own community, because it can seem like a lot of information to digest at once. And they're also welcome to reach out to me anytime. I think my contact information is being dropped in the chat as well. And so I'm always happy to chat with anyone and to talk more about like what this work looks like or could look like, and what it looks like to be a part of Tsuru for Solidarity. So thank you so much to you all for listening and for having me here as a panel.
Oh, thank you so much, Becca. It's really incredible the work that Tsuru's done in such a short amount of time. And I just know that every time I have an interaction with Tsuru, it's just a really amazing experience. So thank you so much. Looking forward to Q&A and afterwards. Okay, so next up, we have two speakers. Brand D. Nakashima, they, them, theirs, is a descendant of formerly interned Japanese Latin Americans and a volunteer for both the Campaign for Justice and the Japanese Latin American Oral History Project. Additionally, they are currently a history PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where they research the hemispheric afterlife of Japanese Latin American internment after World War II, with an emphasis on the creation and maintenance of transnational and community building. Love to hear more about that. And along with Brand, we have Phil Tajitsu Nash, Dr. Phil Tajitsu Nash, who teaches in the Asian American Studies program at the University of Maryland, College Park, and serves as co-president of the board of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. He's also affiliated with the University of Maryland Latin American Studies Center, based on a study abroad class he has taught, bringing students to an indigenous community in the Brazilian Amazon. His research on Japanese Brazilians and his decades of work with Native Americans in North America and Brazil on human rights, culture, and language issues. And I welcome you both, Brand and Phil.
Thank you. Yeah. So first, we want to thank the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages and Julie and Monica for inviting us here today to share our thoughts on allyship and in the Japanese American community. So again, thank you for that. So today, Phil and I are representing the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. Our continuing struggle demands U.S. accountability regarding the unjust seizure, imprisonment, and displacement of Japanese Latin Americans during and after World War II. With our movement being ongoing, concepts of allyship and solidarity are essential in achieving our ultimate goal of not just obtaining justice for our community, but through solidarity, we aim to transform the mechanisms of our society to uplift the marginalized and prevent further injustices. My whole life, I've been connected to my Japanese American background. Yet my Japanese Peruvian background was always secondary until recently. Growing up, my grandfather, who was a no-no boy and Japanese American, was very proud of the letter he received that declared he was eligible to receive $20,000 for redress. He even framed it with a picture of Ronald and Nancy Reagan in his kitchen. Yet, as a child, I was puzzled that my grandmother, who was also in prison, did not have her own letter or picture frame. I never got to ask my grandmother why she did not receive the letter after she passed away in a tragic train accident, and I felt like I lost my chance to ask her myself. So I began educating myself on the JLA experience, and what I learned shocked me. From 1942 to 1947, men, women, and children of Japanese, German, Italian, and Jewish ancestry were displaced from their homes in Latin America to be interned in American concentration camps, which were run mainly by the Department of Justice and not the WRA. And over 2,200 of these internees were of Japanese ancestry. In 1945, with Japan's formal surrender, the ordeal of Japanese Latin Americans internees did not end, as the majority of Japanese Latin Americans were deported to war-torn Japan, and many others struggled in the courts to either return home or to remain in the U.S. Resettlement was not easy, as many JLAs labored in factories and farms, but over time they were allowed to remain in the U.S. and even gained rights to naturalization. As the JLAs rebuilt their shattered lives, they did not forget their mistreatment during the war and learned more about the experiences of Japanese Americans as well. During the late 70s and early 80s, as the Japanese American redress movement was gaining momentum, many in the JLA community put their full support in for JA redress and made efforts for their inclusion by participating in hearings and by mobilizing their communities. After years of activism, the Civil Liberties Act was enacted in 1988, and everyone thought they would get something, but the JLAs did not. The JLAs, through the Campaign for Justice and the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project, continue to fight for equal reparations well into the 90s. And with the Mochizuki settlement, though, during the Clinton administration, it only resulted in a $5,000 settlement with the attitude of take it or leave it. But a take it or leave it mentality dresses the pain of my grandmother and all the other JLAs was only estimated to be $15,000 less than my grandfather's. And I wonder why, right? And the answer that we were given was citizenship, right? My grandfather was a citizen, my grandmother was not. And so there was an inequality there. Some of the JLAs, like Art Shibayama, said no way, and went for a class action lawsuit, which moved to the international courts through the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which resulted in a victory in 2019. But the victory was and has not been recognized by the US government. In 2022, President Biden acknowledged the JLA incarceration and exclusion from redress. This was a step in the right direction. However, this was diminished upon learning that the Biden administration considers resolutions to be under the purview of the US Congress, and no motion from the US government has been made. As we struggle for redress, we acknowledge that we are not in a bubble, and that the concept of allyship and solidarity are pivotal in our movement. And through my time working with CFJ, with people like Grace Sumiju and Phil, they have taught me much about allyship. The first step to allyship is making yourself aware of other people's experiences, especially experiences that have been made invisible. Because our struggle is existing, educating ourselves on other struggles needs to be paired with educating others on our experience as well. And when we are aware of each other's situations, we need to ask, what role should we play in our concurrent struggles? For us, allyship is more than supporting others, even though that is essential. Allyship works in tandem with our own goals, resulting in a solidarity that aims to transform our society by using democracy as a tool of empowerment that can pave the way for a system that respects the rights of all human beings, despite their race, religion, or citizenship status. For us, Japanese Latin Americans, we acknowledge that we were not imprisoned alone, and that German, Italian, and Jewish Latin Americans endured the hardship of internment with us. Through the Enemy Alien Files, a groundbreaking exhibit that exposes the World War II experience of enemy aliens in the U.S., we were able to work with other people who went through similar circumstances as us to share in this experience. Phil, I know that you work a lot with the Enemy Alien Files. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to the Enemy Alien Files exhibit is currently at the University of Maryland, and it's available for people if you want to bring it to your university. Brand has given a wonderful overview of the basic issues, but I want to just remind people that all the things he described coming up through 1988 were phase one of the redress struggle. And when I and others who are, my family was in Minidoka, Japanese American, not Japanese Latin American, although as I have found out in recent years, I have family from Brazil, from Argentina. There are Tajitsus, who eat hotter food and dance better than I do. And yet I'm doing this mainly for the allyship and also for solidarity, and also because it's the right thing to do. It's the same reason why I pushed for marriage equality when I was not gay. It's the same reason why I do a lot of work with Latin Americans and Native American people when I am not part of those communities. It's because we want a world that's better for everyone. And I remember as we were pushing for redress back in the 1980s, it was wonderful to see all these other people come forward. So the Enemy Alien Files is a way of expanding beyond just the Japanese Latin American struggle and saying we are part of the same struggle with the Jewish and Italian and German people who were kidnapped from South America. And in fact, I'm going to be speaking to 4 classes of people who are learning the Italian language next week at the University of Maryland because they want to learn more about the Enemy Alien Files. And that's something we just need to do. We need to reach out to beyond our own communities. Bran?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Additionally, we pay attention to the current injustices, like Tsuru solidarity, like the detention of migrant children. For us, there's a deep connection and a similarity. And in 2019, former JLA internees and their friends and families protested against these detentions in San Antonio. Because we feel that our experiences and the pain that we suffer, we don't want that to occur again. So we definitely we looked and see at other injustices in the world, and for us, solidarity is using the experiences, skills, and connections that we have garnered to assist others in their struggles and to work in collaboration to achieve our disparate goals for one outcome: a more fair and accountable democracy. We aim to combat xenophobia and nativism by using our democratic rights and privileges to assist the underprivileged. A part of strong allyship is to analyze our own privilege and to utilize those said privileges to support and assist those in need. Yet it is also key to let the voices of the oppressed speak out instead of just representing them, which is the most effective method of combating silencing and erasure. Still, without allies, it would be impossible to achieve our goals alone. In the past, allies like Wayne Collins and Reverend Yoshiaki Fukuda have supported the JLAs with their specific skills and backgrounds. And Phil, as you mentioned, your family was not interned in the same way maybe mine was, but you have contributed heavily to the JLA struggles for redress. And could you share a little more about your experience as an ally?
Well, when I was involved with the first phase of Japanese American redress up through 1988, as a lawyer, as a journalist, as a community activist, I was very confident. As Brand said, everybody was pushing for redress. We figured it was going to happen. And then when we saw that people were seen as not being here under, quote, color of law, meaning people like Brand's grandmother had their passports taken away, and they were treated like they were not citizens. They had been brought here. They didn't speak English. Some of them were sent to Japan. Some of them were not allowed to go back to Peru and other countries. They had a very traumatic experience. And then they were economically exploited when many of them were sent to New Jersey and other places where they worked in farming tasks. It was a very, very bad situation. But the bottom line is I realized that my family had been through the camps. They were not kidnapped and brought here the way that Brand's grandmother was, but it didn't matter. We were all suffering. We all needed to have some form of redress. I was fortunate to also be working with Michi Weglin, one of the people who wrote Years of Infamy and convinced many of us to get involved with redress. And as her literary executor and someone who wanted to carry on her legacy, she said, I really regret I'm dying now in 1999, and we haven't gotten redress for Japanese Latin Americans, railroad workers, people who were born in the camps. And so she charged me to continue working. So that's part of the reason I'm doing this as well, to carry on the work of Michi and so many others who have been warriors for this important cause for decades. So that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing it. Now, I love the way Tsuru looks at this, with Becca's presentation. I'm doing this to heal myself, and I'm doing this to empower my brothers, sisters, and family members who are doing, trying to just be themselves and feel good about their own histories, their own families. So that's why I'm involved, and I'm sure many of you are not Japanese Latin American, but I hope you will get involved with this second phase of the redress struggle. Brian?
Yeah, so Campaign for Justice aims not to just advance our own struggle for justice. Our ultimate goal goes beyond our immediate issue. We understand that the type of mistreatment done to JLAs will not end when our goals are realized. We have a collective interest in how to chart a different way forward for our society as a whole. We are building a network of organizations and individuals who have aspirations for a different future. We are developing working relationships to move us forward, not just for the goal of reparations. Democracy only works when the people actively exert their rights and call out actions and philosophies that are antithetical to democratic ideals, especially those committed by the government, whether these injustices occurred hours ago or hundreds of years ago. Join us in urging the Biden administration and the U.S. Congress to secure proper reparations for the JLAs, to honor the rule of law, including our international legal commitments, and to stop the reoccurrence of government. This can be done by talking about JLA, German, and Italian Latin American struggles. If you're interested more in our mission, please visit our website, which I think will be in the link. Additionally, we are always looking for new volunteers. Feel free to contact me or Phil if you're interested. Thank you.
Oh, thank you both so much. I mean, I went to the exhibit at the University of Maryland, and it's just incredible. I mean, I feel a responsibility to know all of that information, and moving forward, we all should. I think the exhibit should be at the Smithsonian. But thank you both so much, and I look forward to more discussion later. Okay, next up, we have Jen Noji and Mark Masaoka with Nikkei Progressives and the NCRR Reparations Committee. So Jen Noji is a member of the Nikkei Progressives / NCRR Reparations Committee, and she's a PhD student at UCLA, where she studies and teaches about ethnic literature, memory, and political violence. Thank you for joining us today, Jen. Mark Masaoka worked 15 years in auto plants, was a union representative, and served as policy director for the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council in Los Angeles, now retired. Mark organized residents to fight evictions in the 1970s Little Tokyo redevelopment, helped the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, NCRR, and currently volunteers with Nikkei Progressives and the Little Tokyo Community Impact Fund. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here, and we look forward to hearing about your work.
Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you everyone for being here and for the other panelists for speaking so far. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that all right? Okay. So yeah, as Julie said, I'm Jen, and I'm going to be speaking with Mark on behalf of Nikkei Progressives and NCRR's Joint Reparation Committee. And to offer some quick background, our Reparations Committee formed in 2020, initially as a kind of education initiative to teach ourselves about reparations for Black Americans, in other words, reparations for slavery and its many violent legacies. And in those early months, we spent a lot of time learning about the long history of African Americans demanding reparations and their basis for doing so. So documents like the Movement for Black Lives Reparation Toolkit were really crucial in our internal education. And I think we'll post a link for that. Yet over the last couple of years, our committee has started to expand by hosting more events like letter writing and phone banking sessions, and connecting with more local and national Black organizers and groups fighting for reparations. For example, folks like Jason Heath and Kenneth Henry, who have been the most incredible partners and advisors to our committee. Yet we've also been actively working with other Japanese American orgs supporting the reparations movement. In fact, in May 2022, Nikkei Progressives and NCRR joined forces with the National JACL and Tsuru for Solidarity, among other Japanese American groups, to form the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition. And I think we'll send another link about that. So founding this coalition was actually really important in the Japanese American community, since it was the first time that these Japanese American organizations joined together to engage in sustained collaborative work. And all of us in this National Nikkei Reparations Coalition are working with the guidance and partnership of the larger Why We Can't Wait coalition, which is supported by over 350 organizations around the world. And it formed in support of HR 40, a federal bill to establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. And I think there's another link in the chat for that. So in other words, we're just a small part of a much larger movement. And our ultimate goal is really to support the demands and initiatives of Black organizers leading the movement. Above all else, we want to amplify their voices and respond to their calls to action. I do, however, want to acknowledge how and why Japanese Americans are particularly motivated and actively involved in the Black reparations movement. For one, Japanese Americans are one of the only groups in US history to have received reparations, in our case, for the injustices we experienced during World War II. Though, as Brand and Phil mentioned, I think there could have been more reparations for all of those injustices during World War II. We'll come back to that later. But anyway, for this reason, Japanese Americans are being asked to speak about their own fight for redress and reparations in today's movement for Black reparations. That's why the only non-Black members of the California Reparations Task Force is a Japanese American person, and why our very own committee member, Kathy Masaoka, was asked to testify in Congress in support of HR 40. However, even when we're asked to speak about our community's experiences, we always try to be clear that what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II is not comparable to the centuries of violence and racism that Black people have experienced in this country. We therefore, by no means, want to impose our recommendations and opinions about what to do, but rather we want to share our experiences and insights in case they might be helpful. And perhaps one of the most important things we did want to highlight is that our community would not have won reparations if not for the help and solidarity of Black Americans. As Kathy Masaoka says in her testimony in Congress, Japanese Americans' demand for reparations was largely inspired by the Black community's fight for civil rights. Their movement gave us the strength and courage to demand redress and reparations from the US government. And when the Japanese did petition for reparations, various Black groups and individuals supported our campaign, including Congressman Mervyn Dimely, Representative Ron Dellums, Assemblywoman Maxine Waters, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and members of the Black Congressional Caucus, among many others. And I emphasize these people because they made reparations possible for our community. And today, we strive to stand in solidarity with Black people demanding reparations, not just because they helped us, but because we believe that it's the right thing to do and that it's long overdue. Yet, of course, everyone in our committee also has their own personal reasons for supporting the movement for reparations. Therefore, I'll conclude my portion by saying that I support reparations because I see how the violence that started against African Americans many centuries ago still continues today. I can't ignore the clear racial discrimination that still exists in housing, education, healthcare, and the ongoing murder of innocent Black people. Also, as a teacher, I can't stand in front of my students and talk to them about political violence and my hope for healing and justice when I'm not doing the work to back it up. And I think some of my students are here today, so thank you for being here. But lastly, in thinking about today's Day of Remembrance, I also want to say that I support reparations to honor my own Japanese American elders and ancestors, those who fought against discrimination, who later fought for Japanese American redress, and who now continue to fight for the rights and justice of other communities. And in thinking about those who came before me, it seems fitting to mention that today is actually my bachan, or my grandmother's birthday. She was incarcerated in the Gila River concentration camp, and she would have been 96 years old today. So thinking of those who are no longer with us and those who still are, I feel the strength and motivation to keep fighting. And with that, I'll turn things over to Mark.
Thank you, Julie and Jen. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Masaoka, and my mother was at Topaz. My father was at Manzanar until the uprising riot required him and his mother to leave before his joining the 442nd and that his brother Mike Masaoka of the JACL had helped to found. I'm going to be speaking about lessons from the work of NCR and Nikkei Progressives that pertain to our solidarity work with Black reparations and what people can do now. First, as Black abolitionist Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. The JA reparations movement began in earnest in the late 70s and early 1980s with the first days of remembrances. The first redress legislation in Congress by Reps Mike Lowry and Merv Dimely. The foundings of NCJAR and NCR, then the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, the congressional hearings, the vocal roles of JAs in Congress, the work of the JACL and broad grassroots activism. The grassroots organizing was often led by activists who gained experience from the movements against the Vietnam War, for ethnic studies, for civil rights, public benefits, and social services, and against the destruction of our Japantowns, all of which were inspired by and had ties with Black-led movements. The JA redress movement was crucially fought for by a broad nationwide grassroots movement that included the 120-person delegation that went to Washington in 1987 to lobby for redress. Less known is the grassroots pressure on the California legislature to reject the governor's cabinet appointment of arch reparations foe Congressman Dan Lundgren, which helped to prompt the H.W. Bush presidential campaign to ask Reagan to sign the reparations bill. And H.W. Bush was the last Republican candidate to win the presidential vote in California. The JA redress movement received broad support, as Jen had mentioned, from the Congressional Black Caucus, from civil rights and civil liberties organizations, churches and labor unions, including the United Auto Workers. It brought together 442nd vets, No-No boys, and JA draft resisters who had gone to prison. A core purpose of NCRR was to see that no such incarceration should take place against any other people to suffer what we had suffered and to work against similar injustices. As Dr. King said, an injustice everywhere, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Our solidarity with the Black reparations demands is not transactional and in a form that was well described by Brand earlier this presentation. In other words, it's not a matter of if I rub your back, you'll rub mine, but it's based on an interconnectedness that we all have a stake in creating a more just and equal world. So solidarity is not altruism or charity. And as a Black Lives Matter activist told a group of mostly white supporters after a rally, we need you to do, he said, we need you to do more than just show up and bring cases of water. We need you to support our leadership, promote our demands, and offer your views, meaning in appropriate settings. Just as there are many differences amongst the groups that came together to form the JA reparations movement, and we worked through them to a large degree, forming a broader united front. The Black reparations movement is still working through major differences of their own. And our view is not to publicly take sides in such disputes, even if we have our own opinions. As Nikkei, we have to also address anti-Black prejudice within our own community. We do this by speaking about the need to do what is right and share our history of racism in this country, even though less severe than what Black Americans have faced over centuries. We also don't find it helpful to focus on JA privilege that emphasizes guilt as a motivation. Privilege suggests that acting in solidarity means giving up something rather than having everyone come up to the level of rights and benefits that those at the top enjoy. Our call for what people can do is first to join the National Nikkei Reparation Coalition that Jen mentioned. Last year, we held workshops. We were involved in letter writing and phone calling to congressional offices. And if you get on our mailing list, we'll be able to keep you informed of these activities. Secondly, if you have a group that is interested in working on this, learn about reparations and also engage local Black community organizations. In Los Angeles, we got to know the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And when they had a week of action, we volunteered and they asked us to have a program on Black reparations in which they participated. And things like that can be done during like Martin Luther King days and other events. Thirdly, in California with AB 3121, there is a California Reparations Task Force developed by the state. And they just issued a 500-page report on the history of Black slavery and harm done to Blacks. And they will soon be releasing a series of recommendations for the state on what they can do for reparations. And we'll be encouraging groups all over to support the report and to endorse the recommendations that the commission makes. Lastly, thank you to JAMP for this program and for bringing the very diverse and resiliencies, the very diverse experiences and resiliencies responding to the anti-Japanese racism of the concentration camp period. Thank you.
Wow, thank you both so much. It's incredible, Mark and Phil, your lived experiences, having been there through all of this, through the actual process of the reparations and et cetera. It's really incredible and bringing that to us. Thank you so much. And I remember seeing Kathy Masaoka testify for HR 40 and it was just really incredible. And so thank you all. I mean, this is such important work. Well, we have a question here from the audience that I think could actually be directed to all of you. But first she directed it, this is from Tiffany Koyama Lane, and she's asking Tsuru for solidarity first, so we'll have Becca answer first, but then everybody else can also answer. Do you feel partnership and support from some of the large Japanese American national organizations? I think we've talked a little bit about that. If not, is that something you hope for? And if yes, what would you want that partnership and support to look like? That's a great question. Go ahead, Becca.
Thanks. Yeah, that is a great question. So Tsuru for Solidarity does collaborate with JCL, JANM, Densho pretty actively. And I think that we really understand that each organization kind of plays a different role. And so when it makes sense for us to come together, it definitely, we definitely look at those opportunities. And I think as Tsuru, we really see ourselves as like a big part of the kind of progressive part of the Japanese American community, and in making space for other organizations to also take what we see as more progressive stances on the issues that we work on. But we work really collaboratively with all three of those orgs, and with pretty much everyone on this call as well. We have at least.
Brian, do you want to, or Phil, you want to?
I want to just discuss one other piece of the solidarity that people may not know about, but I was in New York City in the late 70s, early 80s. And for me, I helped the Japanese American community get going, but there were a number of older people who said, don't rock the boat. We've been through enough trauma. Don't say anything. Just let's just let bygones be bygones. But I was fortunate that I had classmates and friends who were part of the ACT UP movement. Those of you who know the history of the LGBT community know that there were some younger people who said, hey, there are some drugs available that can help us with AIDS. Why isn't the pharmaceutical, why aren't these companies giving us these drugs or charging us so much? And so some of these younger people did these direct actions and things. And I was looking and going, gee, they're not just sitting back, they're getting out there. So for me, as a young Japanese American, I got a lot of strength and a lot of insight from seeing that. And so I knew I wanted to be respectful of my elders, but at the same time, I didn't want to just sit back and let this stuff happen. So that's another example of how my colleagues and friends in the LGBT community inspired me to do more for redress. And the same way, as we look around to the women's movement, the Latinx movement, you can find inspiration everywhere. And at different times of your life, I've not done only Japanese American stuff. At different times in my life, I've done more for the women's movement, more for the environmental movement. It's not a straight line. It's not a transactional thing. Wherever your heart is at that moment, wherever your circle of friends are, that's where you should be directing your energy. There's plenty of stuff that has to be done.
Yeah, I think that there's been generational changes within the JACL that have to be reckoned with. For example, the age of my uncle, and I had a good relationship with him, even though we had our differences. They had their own views about how to proceed with things and what happened during the war. And then I think during the 70s and 80s, I think they had a different relationship with Japan and Japanese corporations than some of us who were fighting to retain the Japan towns that were under threat. But now I think that's a new generation of leadership, and I'm very favorably impressed by the work of the national office of JACL and a number of chapters in supporting both, the immigration work as well as Black reparations. So I think there are opportunities now that did not exist, say, in the past.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear, Mark. And yeah, there's that whole piece, the multi-generational trauma piece as well, right? That goes along with that. And that makes it sometimes difficult within groups. But I like what you said, Phil, about how, well, you just have to go where the energy is going to take you. And Tsuru's working on that intergenerational trauma directly. So we appreciate that and continues to do that work. Jen, did you want to add to that? It sounded like you were really excited about the connection when you guys did connect with JC and National. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's like the one thing I would add on, just kind of I feel like one thing that is so great about the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition is it really, I think, is one of the first time that these different organizations are coming together to work on something in a sustained way. Like I think in the past, maybe JACL, Tsuru, Nikkei Progressives, and other groups have come together for like one-time events or these kinds of things. But this coalition, the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition, is really trying to like keep this work going and keep the collaboration going. So that feels special, maybe like new in this relationship between different Japanese American orgs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we've got some more questions here. Here's a question again, directed to Tsuru, but I think it could be, you could all each answer to some degree. Tiffany said, I'm wondering if you have thoughts or suggestions. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is talking about what we were just talking about, the different generations. If there are thoughts or suggestions with trying to move some of our more conservative elders to consider some of these progressive goals. Okay, it might not just be elders though, right? Or direct actions. I personally find it easier to talk to Japanese American community members about these goals than even talking with my own family sometimes. So would love to hear your thoughts. I guess it's more of a personal thing. Anybody do you want to take that first, Becca, since it was directed to you again? And then we can go around.
Sure, I'm happy to. I think that there's a lot that I can resonate with here myself. But I will say, going back and looking at it from like the really big view, right, is like part of what we have been seeing with the recycling of tactics targeting other communities of color has been really helpful for me to unpack actually what did our community experience and how clearly the government used different tactics to separate us from each other and pit ourselves against each other within our own community, right? And this is the 81st anniversary of the loyalty questionnaire, or the 80th anniversary, for example, the loyalty questionnaire. That's one very clear example, but you've heard other examples from today, right? The exclusion of Japanese Latin Americans from redress and all sorts of things. And then, since then, the model minority myth, right, was an active creation to narratively separate our communities, to claim that that the Asian community is experiencing, is able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, whatever that actually means, and other communities of color can't, right? It's like we're pitted against each other again. And I think we can really internalize those things, right? And it really keeps us from seeing our liberation as tied to one another and from working together, right? It's a very, very clear, in my mind, strategy to keep us from being a very large and powerful coalition to upend racism in this country. And so, that being said, we also have experienced in our community like pretty extreme hardship that we've never had an opportunity to heal from. So I feel like many people in my own family and in our community really need an opportunity to be heartbroken about what happened to our communities, to be furious, absolutely furious. And in order for us to be able to not see any fight for another community or with another community or the uplifting of another community as being at our own expense or in place of fighting for our own liberation. And so I know it's not super easy to have these conversations with people and to, or for us to express our fury and anger and heartbreak. But I think as much as we can, asking earnest questions of ourselves and of each other and really listening to each other's answers to before we jump in and say like you should support these things that I believe in because I say so. And I know it's easier said than done. But I also, for me, this is like a long game personally. Like I am not just committed to this like temporarily to the liberate our kind of collective liberation. And so if that is actually the case, that is going to require me to have quite a bit of patience with any place where I feel stuck or anyone else feels stuck, or I feel like they are stuck in supporting the things that I'm trying to support. And I definitely have some hard conversations in my past and moving forward to really bring everyone along, because that for me, that's what I want. Is I want absolutely everyone in our community to be standing, shoulder to shoulder with other communities of color and with each other. But I know that that's a long game and one I'm into. So I'm down with anyone who wants to share strategies and think about this from a personal place and then also organizationally.
Oh, absolutely. Sharpening those skills of having difficult conversations every day, right? That's a whole workshop right there. Anybody else want to respond to that? Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I think I could just quickly add on to let you all know a little bit more about how the Nikkei Progressives NCR Reparation Committee really thinks about, how to have discussions with folks who, might be more conservative, hesitant about some of these more progressive policies. And so we actually have these like monthly pod discussions. And that actually stemmed from an unpacking anti-Blackness workshop that was hosted by Vigilant Love, another LA-based, community organization. But so after that workshop, a few of us in the committee who attended decided, okay, we're going to meet monthly and talk about different things, work through different issues. And one of those is, how do we have these conversations with folks who, might not agree? And we've been writing letters for the last couple of pod sessions. And it's kind of like letters like aimed towards family members, friends, just practicing expressing like why do I support reparations? Like, why do I think it's important? But I think that kind of letter writing practice could be really done for any issue or topic. And so even if we never send those letters, right, it's helpful to still get us thinking about how to have those difficult conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Those are great sessions too. Okay, sorry. Was that Phil? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, very briefly. It's important to not think of history as something that moved inexorably toward the place we are now. I know that in the early stages of the redress movement, people were denouncing William Horry and the National Coalition for Japanese American Redress. Some people looked at Mike Lowry putting out a direct redress bill. We're saying, no, we need to have the coalition. We need to have the commission. In fact, I'm on record writing a letter, saying, William Horry, why are you saying you want to take your redress money and buy a car? That just demeans my grandparents and all these people. And, through openness and dialogue, I came around to different ways of looking at things. You have to be open to the fact that other people have honest differences. And that's really something we have to be aware of, because, it's not good to just go in the back room and say, oh, that guy, what does he know? It doesn't help anything. Honestly, talk to people, agree to disagree at times. Just know that people don't have bad motives. People are trying to understand things. Like I said, at the Japanese American Buddhist and Christian churches, I took a survey and a lot of these older people said, no, don't rock the boat. It's not like they didn't think they deserve redress. They just had enough trauma. They did not want to have more trauma, and they thought they wouldn't win anyway. So why are we doing this? So that's, I think, the lesson I've learned in 40 years of activism. Just, most people, obviously there are some people who are sociopaths who are not trying to do good things to help other people, but the majority of people are trying to take their life experience and help themselves to move forward one step at a time. So just start where they're at and help them to move forward.
And thanks for that. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yes, I think there is a viewpoint of some of the is that, we came out of the camps with absolutely nothing, and look at where we are today. And so I think by talking about how, over half the American male, military age went into the armed services, and the GI Bill and the VA home loans were very valuable for our community to really advance. And however, for Black Americans, one, you had to get chosen to go to college. You had to be accepted into college to be able to get paid for while you're going to college. And many Blacks were not were not prepared for anything like college. And secondly, many colleges refused to accept them. And for home loans, you had to get a realtor and to sell you a place and a bank to give you a loan. Those were denied to most Black Americans, and areas were not even available for all people of color to live in, but particularly for Black Americans. And so those are some of the causes, which is why we have the kind of circumstances now where those who are college educated are doing much better than those who never had that opportunity. But that was not equally available to people at that time. And that's reflected in much of the wealth and income gaps that we see today.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a lot of questions flying in, so I'm going to put this one because it kind of fits here. Kathy Masaoka, thanks, Kathy. How has your work you're doing changed your thinking about your own history, and what lessons have you learned, and what are you questioning now? Go ahead,
I'll
Brent.
go. Yeah. So, I'm a historian, so history is very important to me. But in the past, right, I had this inclination to not want to study anything that had to do with my family background. I used to study enslavement in Southern Illinois and salt mines. And a part of me was like, well, I don't need to study what's related to me, but because I want to have a non-biased sort of opinion. But when I went to grad school, I changed my mind, and I realized that the histories of my past and my family and my connection to that would enhance the way that I do my studies. But as I studied it more, I got deeper into the mechanics of this past. It helped me to understand that, again, it's deeper than just studying history. It has to do with how does what the past, what can do for the present. And so I changed from being just a historian to a scholar activist through this studying, because I realized that the past is oftentimes I study in an analytical way to try to understand relationships, but then it also goes into the present, as we all know, and that for me, doing history is not just trying to make scholarly ideas more profound or whatever. I think it's about what can I do to make the present better for people. And so I think that by looking into the hard past, like I read books, so like history books, and my grandparents are interviewed, and it's about them suffering. And it's very painful to read those kind of books. And my own history, I'm writing about their suffering. But I always look at I guess looking into the past is finding the bigger goal of making sure that less people suffer. And that's what that means to me.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing. Yeah, and it also has to do with identity, right? Directly. Anybody else want to jump on that? We've got more questions. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, if I could just add on a really specific example for me, I think one thing that, I sort of grew up, well, I hardly grew up learning about Japanese American history, like incarceration at all. But when I finally did, one phrase that is so often used to talk about the event is, it was, the government admits it was driven by race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And I kind of just took that for granted, like, okay, our country acknowledges that this event was wrong. And then through this work, I've learned, like, no, it's like the Sansei Japanese American like activists who really pushed for the government to acknowledge the way that this history was wrong. And so it's really like, all of these organizers who have done this historical work to sort of like redefine the narrative. And I feel like that's like why so much of the work that we're doing is important, because it is kind of, influencing the way history is written and known. So I think that's one thing. I've just really appreciated the work of grassroots organizers and activists so much more.
Here, here. Go ahead, Becca.
Yeah, I will just echo that that framing and that narrative shift as being so crucial. And I really have seen this work as an opportunity for me to learn more about my own history, and to learn more about these kind of hard decisions that Phil, I think you were kind of talking about, are hard places that we've kind of come to from our real lived experience, right? And I remember at one point my grandmother, when she was talking about the decisions that she made after getting out of camp and in the resettlement period, she's like, well, we tried to make the best decisions at the time based off of the information that we had to make life livable for you. Which I was like, oh my God, holy crap, like, whoa. And so, I try and think about that now, like knowing what I know right now from my family's experience, my personal experience of hearing from people now, like, what is the best decision? I don't know, and to your point, Phil, like, we don't necessarily, like, we might think that something is a really great idea right now, and it might in 20 years not look like a great idea. And I might be eating the words that I'm saying on this panel right now, and I think that's fine. But that I think is something that I'm like constantly thinking about, is like what actually makes sense moving forward. What are lessons that we can learn from the past, and like what is influencing us up until this point, and like actually trying to think about something different, right? Than like detention and repression and maintaining the status quo.
I just want to extend the stuff that everyone else is saying. This is a fabulous discussion. Ama-sensei, I'd like to thank you, Jen, for your thanking the Sensei generation, but I was inspired by some tremendous Nisei. There were people like William Horry, like Michi Weglin, like and even Issei. There is somebody named Shosuke Sasaki who was up in Seattle, who was very instrumental in this. People like Edison Uno, the whole Uno family, many people in the Masaoka family. Mark, thank you, and thank all the other people who've been very involved. So it's a multi-generational thing. I mean, my personal goal is to try and have one really close friend from each of the each decade. I have friends who are 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and it may sound trite, but it's really true. I had my 11-year-old goddaughter over here today, and I was learning things from her. I'm never going to be a star on TikTok, but I mean, it's important to understand their world. I'm never going to be totally out of it. I don't understand half of the people she knows or half of the things she does, but it's important to learn from everyone. And when I was younger, I had a lot of friends who were older than I was. Now I'm older than a lot of other people, but I still have friends and colleagues who are older than I am. I think it's really important that you learn from and keep in touch with people across the spectrum, because ageism is a real terrible form of prejudice as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's sort of the wonderful gift of this work, right? Is that we get to know people, or we feel like we're all part of the family. Yeah, thank you for
Can
that.
I add one more thing, Julie?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, just the other thought, because I got emotional thinking about my grandma. I meant to say, I really appreciated also what Mark was saying as far as like the histories right after after camp, and the ways that our communities were able to succeed. And it was helping me to remember, like, oh, there must be blind spots that I also had, right? So like my grandma also at the time, when she's like trying to make decisions to think about her grandchildren that didn't exist yet, like, and how our lives could be better, was like moved into segregated Baltimore, right? And into these systems that existed before she got there, and was trying to navigate those things too. And so in the ways that I might be like, well, we should have thought about it against those things more explicitly, right? Also, she's like by herself and, targeted by white mobs coming into her home with her new baby. And so just trying to think about like where are also the spots where like we might be, you know, we are all, you know, complicit in these systems, but also where we can pull each other in to support each other in these kind of hard spots and you know, make the space for all of us to kind of continue to learn and unlearn things from our own history and our country's history and be actively working to figure out different and better solutions moving forward.
That's so true. And sometimes it's hard to separate the emotion from what's happened, or, you know, and you kind of have to figure out, well, why did that make me so angry? Or, so there's that piece too. But yeah. Okay, we have another question. There are several questions, but this one is directed to you, Mark. But I guess I'll say the question, but then I think I'm going to broaden it a bit. He says, this is from Tom Kurihara. How would you characterize the views of Shin Nikkei community in contrast to the traditional JA community that has connection to the World War II incarceration? How is it significant, and how will it affect the thread being discussed in this program? But I think that also has to do with, you know, Brand and Phil's work, which is, you know, pulling out and seeing the transnational, you know, not looking just at what's happened in the United States, but looking at how there was a global impact, right? So I guess, do you want to answer that question first, Mark, since it was directed to you?
Well, I think that there's been, you know, very deep sort of social divisions, even though, you know, many of us have, you know, our kids were in you know, in sports leagues with children of Shin Nikkei, but, you know, people would talk about Japanese American experience and it would always speak about the camps, even though now a majority of those of Japanese descent in America are those who have descended from Shin Nikkei, you know, statistically. And I think that's why a lot of us are popularizing the term Nikkei, because it's more broadly encompassing than Japanese American, although, you know, and to some extent we still use them interchangeably, but I think that's a step forward. And I think that, so yeah, I think that there haven't been enough steps, although there are people like Charles Egawa in Los Angeles who did a lot to sort of promote, you know, the commonality. And in places like Little Tokyo, you know, there is very, you know, there's a lot of divisions, but that's not one of those divisions. So I think that, you know, progress has been made, but the differences still remain.
Go ahead, Phil.
I just want to remind everybody that there is no other community that I'm aware of where you can say there's something like an Issei, Nisei, Sansei. In every family, you have an uncle who is younger than you are. You have, you know, like if a family has 10 kids, the youngest child is older than the children of the oldest children, you know. So this idea that we have this, you know, all Issei born between 1880 and 1930, all Nisei born between 1900 and 1940, you know, that is an artifact of exclusion and racism. We were, you know, the door was shut in 1924. There were Chinese excluded in 1882. You know, these artificial closings of doors is the reason why we can say there's a nice little sliver of people called Issei and another little sliver called Nisei. So that was always an artifact. And, you know, this idea of having Shin Issei, I understand the word new Nisei. I've been part of communities for years where we have people who are, their parents came in as business people or whatever. But I hope that as we move forward, we will not just think about people as being from a particular camp. Like when I was growing up, it was always like, hi, Jen. The first thing I would say was, where was your family? Oh, they were in Minidoka. My family was in Minidoka too. You know, and that was an in-group type thing, and it was a bonding thing, and it was a way to move ourselves forward. But it also is an exclusionary thing. And we have to realize there are a lot of people who were not that. And as I work with Brand and others with the Japanese Latin American, I realize there's a whole international piece. I've got all these cousins from Argentina and Brazil that I don't even know all of them. So our history has been a diasporic history, people coming, people going, people having different backgrounds. And sometimes these ideas of being Japanese American, it's okay and it's important. As I've grown up, I needed this solidarity to get myself through, but it also can be a handicap if it becomes an in-group thing. And, I'm more American than you because your family was born in Japan. So I just be aware of the internal self-colonization, exclusion that we do in our own defining of ourselves and others.
Yeah, this makes me think of scholar Lisa Lowe, really said that the Asian Americans they're not homogeneous, they're heterogeneous. But also Japanese Americans or Japanese the Nikkei, we're also heterogeneous. We're not all the same. Right? We all come from different backgrounds. Right? Either we be Shin Issei or we be Okinawan or we be a Kibe or whatever. I think we recognize it's very important for us as an ethnicity that there's a diversity of stories and experiences, and if we ignore that, and that we all say we're all the same and we all come from this same background, it's going to make it a lot more difficult. And in our experience at CLAs, that's what it feels kind of like what happens. That our exclusion, maybe sometimes people are not listening for our stories, or so I think it's important that we recognize Shin Nikkei and Okinawans and other groups and such, and that we're diaspora, right? We have connections all over the world, and we're not just in the United States. Yeah,
absolutely. We're gonna have to create some new words. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm so sorry we haven't been able to get to all of the questions, but I wonder if we could go around now. Well, actually, Monica said we got all but one, so which was a more specific question. So what we'll do right now, if everybody could just kind of go around with your last thoughts, or if you have questions or things that you'd like to notice about what somebody else said, that's also something we could share right now too. And who would like to start? But we'll have to choose somebody. Okay, Jen, you want to go? We can
Sure.
popcorn
I
around.
think I'm still reflecting on everything, but I think I want to, maybe just highlight that I think the work that, Becca, Brand, Phil, all of you, your organization's work is so important. And I personally am walking away from this knowing that I need to learn more about the Japanese Latin American experience. I think, as I'm thinking about the work that Mark and I and others do in our movement for, the fight for reparations for Black Americans, there's just so many more reparation struggles and initiatives that are going on. And in this case, it's even almost closer to the Japanese American community, the Japanese Latin American. Yeah, I just feel like there's some kind of historical erasure and historical work that we need to do to bring these folks into perspective more. So I think I'm walking away realizing there's so much more work that needs to be done.
I'm really appreciating this discussion and the thoughtfulness that people brought to their presentations and answers, and obviously the work that is behind all of it. And I'm not sure that I have much more to add other than the future looks bright for our community. What a wealth of knowledge and perspective and thoughtfulness and heart and cool folks that I want to get to know more. This, I really, really loved this, and I appreciate everyone sharing and the folks who are here to listen and ask questions. I'm just so pleased to be with you all today, and in the tomorrows also. I'm excited.
Thank you, Becca. Yeah, I'm going away from this just incredibly grateful. I knew the work of NCRR and Nikkei Progressives. I knew the work of Tsuru, but it's really important that we continue each of these efforts. And I look at Mark's gray hair and my gray hair, but I'm also very grateful that I look at Brand and Becca and Jen, and I see this younger generation coming in too, because I had tremendous benefit by working with Aiko Yoshinaga Herzig, who was, much older than I, but she was a friend of mine. She taught me how to, she sat there fixing her hearing aids, and it gave me the courage to get my own hearing aids. Just little things like that. there were a number of these people who were my movement mommies, my movement aunts, my movement uncles. And so I'm so happy to see that we're passing it on, and other people are going to go far beyond where I was, but that's great because I took it beyond where my parent and grandparent generation was. And that's really how it has to be.
Yeah, so this is like my first kind of time presenting sort of in like a panel and activist setting with other sort of groups beyond Campaign for Justice. And so for me, I'm reflecting on this. I think, I live in Wisconsin. There's not a lot of Japanese American people in Wisconsin and not a lot of Japanese American activism, but it makes me feel happy to know that there's so much going on in these different communities across the country, and that our different goals all have similar endings of creating a more equal nation, equal planet, and seeing all the work that everyone's doing, it inspires me and helps me to want to keep going even when it gets hard.
Well, I also enjoyed and learned a great deal from all of you. My last thought is that there are a lot of Nikkei young people who are active in other social movements who I think for some reason haven't connected to some of the Nikkei movements. And I also think that a lot of Nikkei are also involved in other social movements, but haven't really brought our experiences, haven't understood how to bring our experiences to these other movements. And that's just something I think we all can give thought to.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. Well, thank you all so much. It's been an incredible afternoon, and I'm glad this is recorded because I think I want to watch it again. So I just want to remind everybody that this session is being recorded and it will be posted. So Kimiko will be posting that on the JAMP YouTube channel. So please do share with family and friends, allies who were not able to make this session. And please, we will be sending out a follow-up email with that link, and also we'll include all of the links that were in the chat if you missed some of those. Go ahead and you can kind of scroll, but we'll try to send all of those to you because all three of these groups have such important work, and it'll be great if you could stay in touch. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And we hope you have a great week this week. And let's definitely all stay in touch. Tadaima 2023 is coming up in October. So please join.